This video is going to cover a collection of advice for preparing to create your digital portfolio, regardless of whether you're going through the promotion, tenure, continuance, or perhaps the midterm review process. My name is Michael Vaughn. I'm an instructional technologist in teaching and learning technologies. I've been the technical support for the promotion and tenure process since about 2013, and I've offered a couple of different types of support during that time. Now, generally speaking, I usually recommend that people going through the process meet with me at least twice. The first meeting would be a 15-minute meeting, usually covering a bit of advice about how to prepare for eventually creating the portfolio, and then a second meeting later when we go through the more technical aspects of creating the document itself. Since this video covers everything that we would have covered in meeting 1, we can really just defer to meeting 2, although I am happy to answer any questions you have along the way if you use my contact info, and I'm happy to meet with you as many times as you need. I've met with some instructors more than a dozen times going through the process, so there's really not too many meetings in this. A lot of the advice that I'm going to include in this video answers the question, what can current you do for future you? Because it turns out future you is very busy and even more stressed out than current you. So what is current you able to do to prepare for that? For example, when you're preparing your promotion and tenure continuance portfolio, one thing that people usually look at is, should I create the digital portfolio first, which is technically the last part of my portfolio, or should I create the paper portfolio first? And it kind of depends. So if you think that you're relatively tech savvy, I would say yes, go ahead and create the digital portfolio first. And if you don't think you're tech savvy, go ahead and create the digital portfolio first. The reason for this is that creating the paper portfolio first means that you now have to digitize that entire document. That is a very time-intensive and laborious process that's not going to produce a good digital portfolio for you. So I strongly recommend, even if you feel uncomfortable with the technology, creating the digital portfolio first. Now, in terms of advice that I like to give faculty who are going through the process of creating the digital portfolio, it's kind of broken into two different sections. One is my 3 S's, the other would be the ABCs. Now, in terms of the 3 S's here, the first is that you want your portfolio to be structured. This is a very large document that someone else is going to read. So what you need to do is have a very clear structure so that it's obvious where to find certain things. You can help prepare for that eventual process right now by doing this with your files on your computer. First, I would create one overall folder for all of your promotion and tenure documents that you're going to be including in the portfolio. Within that overall folder, I would create additional folders for each individual sections. It's up to you what you name these for now, as long as the names make sense to you. Now, where I would expand this a bit would be in Section 4. Section 4 tends to be the largest section in terms of the volume of documents, though it's not always the largest in terms of number of pages, because that's typically the spots. But in Section 4, because you're going to likely end up with so many documents, I would encourage you to create 3 additional subfolders for teaching, service, and scholarship. The next S would be skimmable. If you think about this, we rely on cues to find our way around all sorts of different things. Now, in a book, we rely on things like the table of contents and chapter pages to let us know that we've entered a new section of the book. This is just simple wayfinding. So what I would encourage you to do first is to create a cover page for each major section and subsection of your document. It's very likely that the members of the committee are going to be reading the digital version of your portfolio, because that way multiple committee members can read it at the same time. So that means that they're going to be scrolling through the document, and you want it to be obvious when they've entered a new section. This is actually a lot easier than it sounds. You would just create one Word document, a one-page document that has a cover page, then you would do File, Save As, and you would update it as you go along. But again, I recommend one for each major section and subsection. Another thing that also helps make your document skimmable is making sure that you have clean file names. What I mean by this is sometimes we download journal articles and they download as ssjb740_s.pdf. That makes no sense. That's hard for you because as you're looking at all these different files, it's not obvious to you what that file is unless you open it. But the other thing is, later when you do the combination process, we're going to be using Adobe Acrobat. What Adobe Acrobat will do is generate a digital table of contents for you, but it's going to make each bookmark the name of the file name. So in this case, the name that you see on screen would become the bookmark for this file. Instead, I would clean up your file names now so that they make sense as bookmarks later. It also helps you figure out what documents you're looking at, so it's a win-win. The last S is searchable. You want your documents to be searchable. Again, the committee is very likely going to be reading the digital version of your portfolio. What that means is that if you mention something in a later section, you want them to be able to search for that content. To make your document as searchable as possible, what I recommend doing is scanning as little as possible. So as often as you can, rely on the original digital version of that document rather than scanning it in. Now, in fairness, I have not met someone who hasn't had to scan at least something in so far, but when you scan a document, what you're doing is you're just taking a picture of it, and then it has to be processed through special software if you want it to become searchable. And while that software is very good, it's still not perfect. So as often as possible, just rely on the original digital version of that document if you can. So those are the three S's: structured, skimmable, and searchable. I also have some ABC advice that falls a little bit outside of the technical piece that I find to be very important. A is ask for more letters than you think you need, especially if you're going up for promotion or tenure. This is hands down the biggest bottleneck that I have seen for faculty over the past near decade that I've been supporting this process. I've had folks who were done in June who weren't able to submit until the last day in September because they were waiting on letters from someone else. So what I would encourage you to do is ask for probably 3 more letters than you actually need or want. The reason being that you're going to learn that some of your friends and colleagues are very bad at time management, and best case scenario, you get to pick and choose the absolute best face forward for those letters that would represent and support you and what you're trying to do. B is backup to the cloud, and it doesn't matter to me which cloud-based service you use, although I strongly prefer that you use Microsoft OneDrive provided through your elon.edu email account. Now, as long as it's backed up somewhere, I'm happy, but I strongly recommend you use OneDrive because it gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of where you can work. You can work on your phone, you work on any computer with a browser, you can work on your work computer. But not only that, IT at Elon provides support and training for OneDrive because we provide it as a service to everyone. So OneDrive is my preference, but I want to make sure that those documents are just backed up somewhere in the cloud. Don't use a USB drive. Please don't use a USB drive. I worked with someone several years ago who used a USB drive and then they lost it for 2 weeks in August. And that was a very bad time for them. So back up those files to the cloud. There's version history, so you can bounce back to last Tuesday's version of that document if you happen to mess something up. Just make sure that they're backed up somewhere so that if something bad happens to the hardware, the files are safely stored somewhere else. Finally, C is that conversions aren't needed. And what I mean by that is it would be more of a headache for you as you go along to save everything as a PDF. You don't have to do that. Adobe Acrobat will actually convert everything to a PDF for you as you go along during the combination process at the end. It can actually be more troublesome to convert to PDF as you go along because then you end up with 2 versions of the document. So if you're working on a Word document and you save it as a PDF, you now have the Word document and the PDF. Now, if you decide later you want to update the Word document, what do? Do you save over top of the PDF? Do you delete the PDF and save a new one? Do you create a second PDF? Right? You don't really have to answer those questions because you don't have to create the PDF to begin with. The only time I would say go ahead and create a PDF is if you're working with a file format that is very obscure, something like a file that Mathematica, as an example, would generate. So if there's a hyper-specific piece of software in your field and you don't think that the file format is normal, go ahead and save that as a PDF, but everything else can just be normal, and Adobe will convert it during the conversion process and the combination process at the very end. So again, here's my contact information. This is all the information that I usually cover in the first meeting with instructors who are going through promotion, tenure, continuance, or midterm review. And if you run into any questions, just send me an email, give me a phone call. We can go from there. I will meet with you as many times as you need, and I'm happy to answer any questions that come up.